So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our latest program. Tonight we'll be having a discussion with Margaret Kimberly. So I'm so excited for tonight's discussion, sponsored by Massachusetts Peace Action. We are a local nonprofit anti-war group, grassroots group focused on committed to nuclear abolition, ending wars, and a peaceful US foreign policy. So tonight, as I said, I'm really excited and honored really to be joined by Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is the co-founder and executive editor of the Black Agenda Report. She also writes a column there called Freedom Rider, which everyone could read. She's also the author of the book Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. So I'm really excited for tonight's discussion. We're going to be covering different topics. We'll talk about some articles she's written. We'll talk about some current events, and this program will go until 8 o'clock. So in the last 10, 15 minutes or so, we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for Margaret, feel free, get ready for, you'll have your chance to ask her tonight. So Margaret, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. Great. So to get us started tonight, could you talk to us a little bit about these deportations we've been hearing about of Haitians? Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. We're seeing in real time the culmination of US interference in the affairs of Haiti. I think it's important to keep in mind when we hear Haiti described as the poorest country in the hemisphere, or it's always a mess or something like that, that Haiti is in effect not a sovereign, nation. It was invaded by the US in the Woodrow Wilson administration. Millions of dollars were stolen from the country. France, in an act of revenge, stole millions of dollars from Haiti for almost 100 years, from the 1820s till 1940s. The US kidnapped President Aristide. Before Aristide, the puppet government of the Duvalier family. And since that time, it's been under UN occupation. The UN even brought cholera to Haiti. Troops from Nepal are responsible, dumped sewage into a river, and thousands of people died there. The so-called core group, US, EU, Canada, United Nations, in effect choose who's going to run the country, and they work with a group of oligarchs who determine what happens there. There have been huge protests in Haiti for the past year. Hundreds of thousands of people, I know most people have never seen this in the corporate media, protesting against their government. Specifically, Venezuela, in the days of Hugo Chavez, helped Haiti and other countries in the region with Petro-Carib funds, which were all stolen. And people have been leaving Haiti, trying to get to the US, trying to get to other countries. Some had, in fact, gone to Latin American countries, to Peru and Chile, to Brazil, to Panama, and are now, and actually it's not new that patients are on the border. There have been people waiting near Tijuana for a couple of years. When they changed the policy for asylum seeking and said that you had to apply outside of the United States, it created this terrible condition for people in Mexico, and people are still trying to get to the US border. It's important to remember that you have, at least technically, the right to seek asylum. And the concern of that I have and many other people have is that these people are being flown back to Haiti. Some of them haven't been in Haiti actually for years, where the situation deteriorates, where the president was recently assassinated. So I think it's important that for Haitians, for other people on the border, all over the world, that we maintain the right for people to seek asylum, to make the asylum request, and that the US, most importantly, stop interfering in the affairs of other countries. That is what drives people here. the coups, the invasions. You know, all the Central Americans on the border, very few of them are from Nicaragua, for example, a left-leaning country where they have a safety net, where the government does its best to help its population. There are very few Nicaraguans trying to enter the United States. So those, I think, are the most important things to know about Haiti at this juncture.
And where has the Biden administration been on this? Didn't someone, is this correct? Didn't someone from the Biden administration say, don't come here?
Yes, that someone was the vice president. Yes, do not come, she said in her clipped little voice. I don't like her, that's why I make fun. But yes, she said the same thing. You know, Biden policy on the border is the same as Trump policy, just as it is in other areas of foreign policy. There really has not been very much change. So the Biden administration wants to keep people out. They've been deporting people. Several thousand people have already been on deportation flights back to Haiti in the last week. And there's something very important. Last week, the US Special Envoy to Haiti resigned. And he resigned, he wrote a scathing letter. It's fairly short, actually. I urge people to Google and find it. He said essentially that he'd been lied to by the administration, that the US is still in the business of picking Haiti's leaders. There's been a process, a civil society process in Haiti recommending how to move forward with the new president, but the US has ignored it. So in his letter, he basically berated the Biden administration for continuing bad policy and for creating this humanitarian crisis. So I think that is a very big deal. People don't resign on principle very often, unfortunately. So I think that gives you an indication of how bad things are, that a career diplomat would publicly condemn what the Biden administration is doing.
What was his name again, this diplomat?
I'm blanking on his name. I can't remember his name. But if you look it up, it's should I look it up? I know it's so embarrassing. Hold up.
We could look it up later and share also in a follow-up email.
I want to say the man's name. I did read the letter despite my blanking my senior moment, and I'm not really a senior, but Daniel Foote.
Daniel Foote. Okay, thank you.
Foote.
Yes, great.
And he's a career diplomat. This was not his first posting. He's been around a while, but it has to have been pretty bad for him to have been so public in his condemnation of the Biden administration.
So speaking of President Biden's foreign policy, you recently wrote a piece called Afghanistan about his Afghanistan policy. Could you talk to us about that? What's your message in this piece?
Well, 20 years, I mean, just think about it. 20 years, thousands of people dead, $2 trillion of public money, our money, spent in Afghanistan to defeat people. And then the United States leaves and turns over the country to the people we were told were evil and should not, and had to be destroyed and had to be run out. This was the first casualty of 9/11. I had forgotten that the congressional vote to authorize the war against Afghanistan happened just a few days. It was September 14th. It was just 3 days. And I think that was done purposefully to make sure that no one had time to think while the country was still in shock, while people were still angry, where it was unlikely that any voices of opposition would be heard. Only one member of Congress, Barbara Lee, voted against it. And for 20 years, we were told, first of all, none of the 9/11 hijackers were from Afghanistan or in Afghanistan. They hatched the plot in European countries, Germany, among other places. Bin Laden may have been there, but he had quickly left. So the goal of ramming this through so fast was to make sure that it happened, that the US would continue its policies, a project of new American century of basically the United States interfering more forcefully in the affairs of that region, including sending troops, having a physical military presence in the region. And after all this time, and that $2 trillion, that all went to the military industrial complex. So they won. They absolutely did win. The Raytheons and McDonnell Douglases and so forth. Our defense secretary came straight from Raytheon to the Pentagon, and they waived the rules to, which were supposed to require a period of time where between working for a defense contractor and going to the Defense Department, but they've dispensed even with the pretense apparently. And so the US is there for 20 years. Now, most people, after all this time, the average American did not see the point in these, the forever wars. Iraq followed soon after, of course, and that was 18 years ago. Donald Trump, I think, peeled enough votes away from Hillary Clinton in those swing states by saying he would end the forever wars. And he began the process, which continued under Biden. I think leaving Afghanistan is a good thing to have done. I'm a little concerned that they are doing it in order to target China, however, so that's not something I would want to celebrate. But I think the departure made the news because of the way in which it was handled, the fact that it was managed so badly that people saw, people were hanging from a plane. I'm assuming they couldn't detach themselves before the plane took off and fell and died. But to see people swarming the airport, to see the lack of well-managed process brought it back into the news. And then you had people attacking Biden from the right, saying that it was a bad thing to leave Afghanistan, when that is not the case at all. But the fact that the US departed, this great failure, shows you the ultimate failure of these policies. We were told that Afghanistan had an army of 300,000 men. It did not, it never did. As soon as they stopped sending money, and all those troops, by the way, were paid for by the US. So this alleged Afghanistan army was not really in existence. Troops had been leaving, they hadn't been paid for months, and they just disappeared. And the Taliban, who we were told had to be defeated, took over very quickly. The US puppet president, every leader of Afghanistan has been a US puppet in the last 20 years. He left the country with, I think it was $170 million. He had to leave some of the money, I mean, it was cash, actual cash, that he had to leave at the airport because he couldn't stuff it all into his plane. So this is a failure of, I don't want to criticize those of us who want peace, but it shows that we don't have the ear of the people like we should. I mean, it was very difficult after 9/11, of course, because people were told that this is what we had to do. But during that time, that the money was funded over and over and over again. And even these so-called progressives in Congress, who may be progressive on domestic issues, they keep voting for this defense spending. Defense spending is now 60% of all discretionary spending. And it is literally why we can't have nice things, why we can't pay for everything else. We're told, how are you going to pay for that? Where's that money going to come from? Well, I think it should come from the Defense Department. It could easily be cut in half. We could close those military bases, end these forever wars, and we could have healthcare, education, infrastructure, housing. There shouldn't be any homeless people there. No one should be without health care. No one should have to be gouged by these horrible insurance companies. All of those things could be done. if we did not have this continued bipartisan political support for the military-industrial complex. And it does bother me that people were upset more about the optics of the American departure than about this 20-year-long catastrophe for people in Afghanistan. Many thousands of Afghanistan civilians were killed by the US. And on their way out the door, there was a suicide bombing at the airport. It killed American service people, among others. And they claimed they got the terrorist who did it. Instead, who was killed? A family with little kids. So the US left the way it came in.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you mentioned the mainstream media coverage of this and how they were so concerned about the optics. And, I think the mainstream media coverage of this goes to show, in part, the impact of the military industrial complex on the media, which is why, sources like Black Agenda Report are so important. Your article here on Afghanistan, it goes into the historical context and how we funded the Mujahideen and against the Russians. And this is so important for people to understand. You mentioned, you alluded to this US policy in regards to China and a potential war with China. So can we talk more about that? We at Mass Peace Action are also very concerned about hawkish policies towards China. Do you accept this view that US war or Cold War with China, this will be like the foreign policy issue maybe for the rest of our lives?
It worries me too. It worries me quite a bit. This anger and resentment towards China is basically because China has succeeded where the US has failed. It's very funny. I'm old enough to remember when Nixon went to China, and the Cold Warrior, the Red Baiter, is the one who went to China in the early 70s. And made this rapprochement, which was an excellent thing. It was wonderful. And over the years, when China made this turn in its politics and decided to, they call it opening up, reform and opening up, which included, among other things, having some elements of capitalism albeit under state control. So what did they do? The Republicans and Democrats, they wanted China in the WTO, so that China could produce cheap goods for us to buy. Excuse me, but China did more than that and is now this economic powerhouse and is a competitor economically with the US. It's the second largest economy in the world and shortly will surpass the United States. So everything we're told about China, everything from Uyghur concentration camps, which do not exist, we don't have enough time to talk about that, but I am secure in saying that all the lies we're told about China, it's anger about China being a true competitor to the United States. And we should keep that in mind when we read almost always negative stories about China. If you look, the New York Times or the Washington Post, every story about China is negative, every single one. No recognition of its economic prowess. They have recently declared that they've lifted 100 million people out of extreme poverty. Well, let's say they're lying and it's not 100 million. Let's say it's only 50 million. Well, this is not a goal in US policy at all for Democrats or Republicans. So I think it behooves us to be at the very least skeptical about China. The thing that bothers me also is the sheer incompetence, frankly, of the Biden administration, Trump first and now Biden. We've seen Meng Wanzhou, who was the CFO of Huawei. Huawei 5G was taking over the world until the United States forced its allies not to do business with them any longer. Huawei can't do business here at all. This ham-fisted effort to accuse her of a crime, which was sketchy at at best, something that the US has the US is claiming that it has the right to snatch people anywhere in the world, and the Canadians foolishly went along with it, and the Chinese snatched 2 Canadian citizens. But China held firm, and she went home and continued to plead not guilty. That was part of the deal. And we don't have enough good analysis of that, unfortunately. So this is what we, and there was the recent, it's a big debacle now that the United States and Australia and the UK were forming this alliance, AUKUS, in the Pacific, and giving Australia nuclear subs. But France thought they had a deal to give Australia nuclear subs. The French were mad, recalled their ambassador. Biden had to call President Macron and apologize. And it was a diplomatic disaster. But so that bothers me too, this panic and this frankly stupidity about China is very, very dangerous. We're talking about nuclear nations, nuclear powers, and we have no diplomacy anymore. Just the United States deciding that it can do whatever we want. And that's a policy that goes from president to president to president. The United States claiming they can render people, kill lists, and it's Democrats, it's Republicans, it's all of them. So not only must we oppose this policy, but we have to watch our government, because they can't be trusted to do anything that's even intelligent.
Yeah, I agree. And when we spoke to Jeff Sachs, he said much of what you're saying as well, that we're antagonizing China because they were successful economically. Part of that economic success was our own policies, such as NAFTA, which came at the expense of our own industrial economy. And now this whole threat of China is being used to increase Pentagon budget, the military industrial complex, to use our tax money to sell more nuclear weapons. So this is really bad. And yes, for peace activists and activists, it's really important to oppose war with China. So I want to talk a little bit about politics because it impacts everything we're talking about. And I just think that just for a little context, I think that everybody goes through some sort of adversity or hardship at some point in their life. And for me in my life, something that has helped me through like adversity and hardship has been like my religious and spiritual beliefs, like a relationship with God and Islam, and then to see the post 9/11 culture in this country, where even the Democratic politicians were voting for the Patriot Act and voting for these wars that we've been talking about, these endless wars. And I know people from impacted communities that have been imprisoned unjustly, innocent people. And they've been harmed by these policies that the Democrats supported, along with the Republicans, like bipartisan support. And I've seen these impacted family members go to Congress, like begging them essentially that your policies that you supported have destroyed our families. They've imprisoned our brother and our father. And can you reverse these policies? They're racist and inhumane. And I've seen the Democrats politely shut the door on them. So it's hard for me to like because of this life experience, it's hard for me to sign up to support the Democrats, that the solution out of all of this is more progressive Democrats. So I don't know, could you comment on this? What are your thoughts?
Sure. It's you're absolutely right, because when it comes to, first of all, they're not even that progressive when it comes to domestic policy. They don't, I keep wondering, we keep being told Biden could do this or he could do that, but the evil Senator Joe Manchin won't let him, and Kristen Sinema won't let him. And aren't there progressives who could tell him, could make demands? They claim to be progressive, but when it comes to really fighting for us, they never are. So they aren't that progressive domestically. And when it comes to foreign policy, you can forget it. They all throw in the towel, and they're very obvious. Last week, we saw the vote about Israel's Iron Dome. Was it 9 or 10 members of Congress who voted no? I mean, it was a tiny, tiny number. Even so-called progressives went right along with what they always do. So I don't see, I agree with you, I don't see how putting more phony progressives in office is going to help us at all. So it's a big issue. It's something not easily resolved, how to mobilize people. That's the thing that we have with the lack of a movement. You know, it's easy to make fun of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I did, you know, at the Met Gala, and she's crying about the Iron Dome, she switched her vote, but that all happens because there's no one to keep her honest. Because we don't have that mass movement. And that's something to remember about many things that happen in this country or don't happen, the things that should happen but don't. They, you know, they can get away with things. They don't say, well, the people will rise up if we do that. No. So the end result is a lot of talk. The end result is politicians who are bought off. And you have to watch these progressives. They'll brag about, they'll say, I don't take PAC money. I don't take corporate PAC money. Well, so what? If you end up voting the same way as the people who do, what good are you? If you don't undo anything, and you're right about the legacy of 9/11, it's done so much damage. The Patriot Act, all these things that are supposed to be temporary, right? The Patriot Act has to be renewed. So we were told, well, it has to be renewed. Don't worry about anything, but they keep renewing it. This loss of our rights that presidents like, you know, Obama was supposed to be this progressive hero. He claimed the right to kill anybody he wanted without charge, without trial, anywhere in the world. He could send a drone and kill American citizens, to snatch people anywhere they are in the world. The continued growth of the military industrial complex, the fact that we're always told we can never get out of these wars, that any nation that dares to act on its sovereignty and have a left government is under attack. All of these things have gotten worse. And I'm assuming you're referring to these cases where people have been alleged to be terrorists when they aren't, where it's usually a government informant who creates a plot, and people are snatched up and put in jail for years. So many terrible things have happened in the past 20 years, and it happens so often, and it keeps happening, and so much time has gone by. I think that people don't even realize the damage that has been done to our lives and to politics and to journalism. We don't have any adversarial corporate journalism. You know, there would be no Pentagon Papers today. There's no newspaper who that would do that. They've locked up Julian Assange. Do journalists come to his defense? No, they do not. So that's the kind of world we've been in post 9/11, and you can see it in our politics.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to Julian Assange, not only do some of these prominent journalists not come to his defense, a lot of times they attack him. They justify the persecution of Julian Assange. So that shows where we are in the media. There's a lot of follow-up questions I wanted to say. You're right. That's what I was alluding to, these FBI entrapment cases. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk more about that in a second. But before we get to that, I want to talk about, can you talk about how, like, earlier today, we had a Zoom meeting and we were discussing political strategy. And in my head, I thought, what does it matter? Because if the Republicans retake the House, there's going to be so much pressure to just oppose Republicans. Can you talk about how our politics has devolved on the left to like opposing Republicans?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's especially true for Black people, where we are our politics has devolved. All politics in this country has devolved over the last few decades, where we are told we can't have anything we want. You can't have the minimum wage. You can't increase that's what I meant. You can't have an increase. You can't have free healthcare, which everybody wants. Everybody, a majority of people, even a majority of Republicans would like Medicare for all. People don't like being gouged by insurance companies, going broke because they get sick, but we're told we can't have it. So we're always told we can't have what we want, and we've got to go along to get along. The Democrats are the lesser evil, and especially with Trump, it's like, do you want Trump? Because he's the face of the Republican Party. So Democrats love to run against Trump, even though he's out of office. So that's what we're exhorted to do, just to keep the evil Republicans out. But what do we get when the Democrats are in? So they control the House. They have a small margin in the Senate, which apparently keeps them from doing anything. That's what they tell us anyhow. And so what do we have? A Democratic president, Democratic House, alleged Democratic control of the Senate, and we get none of the things that we want to have. We're constantly told that we can't have those things, and all we can do is keep voting for these people who never give us what we want. Because if we don't vote for them, we get another Trump, and it's all our fault if a Democrat loses. But what's so terrible about Democrats losing, if Biden comes into office and essentially continues all of Trump's foreign policy? What has he changed? The US Embassy is still in Jerusalem. They haven't gone back to the nuclear deal that Obama is the one who got that done with Iran. Still undermining governments in Venezuela and Nicaragua, keeping Trump's sanctions against Cuba. Cubans can't even send money home anymore. That's something that Trump did, but Biden has continued it. So I think people should not allow themselves to be harassed and harangued and intimidated into supporting these people. I feel no need to vote for them. I'm registered as a Green Party member, and I exhort people all the time to say no, because it's just it's a con game. It's like 3-card Monte or something, where you always end up with the short end of the stick, or I don't know if 3-card Monte is my analogy, you end up with something else. But at any rate, I think you get my point. So yes, we have to question this, and we can't allow ourselves to be dragooned, especially every 4 years, into supporting these horrible people. I don't know what's going to have to happen before people rise up. We saw some of it last year in the wake of George Floyd's killing. We saw millions of people take to the street, and it just kind of died out. And I think the election was one of the reasons why. These presidential elections take all the air out of the room, and we're told we got to get rid of Trump. And that's all you can do. You can't ask a question, make a demand, say that you want something. That you get this caricature fascist but everybody seems to have the same fascist policies, right? But I think we have to have the courage to say no, and at the very least not go along with this. We know what do they say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So we can't be insane.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this reminds me of an article of yours I read recently called Democrats, Abortion, and Phony Politics. You talk about a lot of these themes, and could you add on what you were saying in the context of this article you wrote?
Sure. I think Democrats, I think they hope and pray that the right wing do something nutty so they can run against that instead of actually doing something that we expect them to do. So this abortion law in Texas, where they basically outlaw abortion. I think you have 6 weeks to have an abortion. And if anybody finds out you have an abortion, they can sue you or sue the provider, and which is terrible. It's awful. The Supreme Court refused to even hear objections to the case. And but it turns out that the Democrats have the ability to end, excuse me, these various states passed these laws which severely restrict abortion access. And basically all they have to do is say that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and that you, in essence, have a right to an abortion by law. But they haven't done that, and now they're claiming they're going to do it. But once again, it's like, oh, but we can't win in the Senate, so there'll be another shell game going on. But it's important for people to know, many times when the Democrats wring their hands about not being able to do something, that it's just not true. And this is just one example of the way in which they use Republicans as an excuse not to do what the people want them to do.
Right. And somewhat related to this conversation, bringing it back to like post 9/11, and you were talking about how the FBI, a lot of times they did these entrapment cases of Muslim people. Sometimes those young Muslim men or boys even would have mental illness. Other times they might have just been unemployed or somehow marginalized from society. And the FBI did these entrapment schemes and locked up innocent people. Then they would do these press conferences congratulating themselves, saying they busted a terrorism ring. And so that happened. That's very well documented. And I know some of those people. And so one thing that's been happening, and people from that community have been talking about, is that the FBI, it seems like they're starting to do more and more of this with like right-wing white people, like Trump supporters. And we've seen that, I think, maybe in the case of this governor of Michigan kidnapping. And also there was an FBI informant who wasn't charged in the January 6th attacks. So my thoughts of this are, and this is also related to the war on terror, because after the war on terror, that's when they pushed through the Patriot Act in these wars. And now after January 6th, they're trying to further empower the national security state. And a lot of the left is supporting that because they perceive it to be attacking Trump or Republicans or whatever. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think we have to not trust the security state. It's very simple. You know, even it's interesting, these so-called liberals, MSNBC or CNN, they always have CIA and directors and FBI agents who are supposed to be the good people. That's one of the reasons I think the Russiagate fraud was perpetrated for so long. They got buy-in from people who pass for what's the left wing in this country. And so people don't want to, so because they're perceived as these good people who are on our side, everybody forgets their history. The history of COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, for decades, entrapping people on the left, actually killing people like Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, or stirring up dissension in groups, getting people to kill each other, reading people's mail, all kinds of things that were done by the FBI and by the CIA. And we saw the Church Commission in the 70s after the late Senator Frank Church revealing these actions in the US and around the world, attempted assassinations around the world. And everybody seems to have forgotten that. When the story broke about this plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, the first thing I said to myself was, I wonder if there was an informant. If you're, just a tip, if in any political activity, if someone says, hey, let's kidnap the governor, that person's an informant. There are 6 Black men from, I believe it's Rockland County, New York. It's north of New York City, Newburgh, New York, who were entrapped into planting a bomb in a synagogue. And the man who entrapped them has entrapped other people as well. There's a horrible case in Florida, Black men there who were essentially homeless. And this informant got them to take some kind of pledge. It was supposed to be up to Al-Qaeda, and they claimed they were going to blow up the Sears building in Chicago. It took them, I think, 3 different trials before they got a conviction because the case was so bad. One man was acquitted outright, but they're still in jail. They're going to do many years in jail. So there are lots of examples of cases like this. Instead of chasing and finding the domestic terrorists among us to create these plots to keep buy-in for the war on terror, for the military spending, for the invasions. If you're always told that there are always these terrorists who can come and get us. Does anybody else remember the color coding? It was a red alert, it was an orange alert, it was always some kind of alert. And which disappeared after Bush was reelected. I don't know if anybody else remembers that. So all of these things are phony. The security state is not on our side ever. And we have to be careful. So with January 6th, I believe it was a member of the Proud Boys who had an FBI handler, which tells me I shouldn't be worried about the Proud Boys. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people who are dangerous. We have mass shooters, we have bombers, last Christmas, somebody exploded a bomb in downtown Nashville, destroyed an entire block. It's a mysterious case. So there are people who are unhinged, people who are have political grievances, all kinds of people who we should be looking for. And that law enforcement should be looking for, but that never happens. So it should tell all of us that these concerns about terrorism are phony. If you can, all your big cases are essentially, and it's very difficult to defend oneself with entrapment, which is why all these people have been convicted and are doing long sentences in prison. But we have to remember what these agencies do, on whose behalf they work, and we can't allow ourselves to be fooled into giving them any support.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've been so fortunate in this position to speak to so many people and get different perspectives and thoughts and go on this really important learning journey. And so someone was critical of some webinar guests I've had saying, oh, they're too supportive of the Chinese government or the Russian government or the Syrian government or whoever, whatever. And I'm like, how is any webinar guest I've got like any worse than MSNBC? They're full of John Brennan and James Clapper and all these people. So I think I heard you, Margaret, one time say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I heard you say that MSNBC is worse than Fox News. Is that true? Why did you say that?
Oh, absolutely. I think they're worse than Fox because they have the appearance of being left when they are not. They are in favor of the wars, in favor of the security state. They defend, they're Democratic Party propagandists is what they are, CNN as well. And Fox News, you know who they are. You know they support Republicans. And it's a funny thing, and Americans substitute political activity by watching TV. So if there's a Democrat in office, Fox's ratings go up because people feel like they're being active by watching right-wingers. And if there's a Democrat in, then their ratings I'm sorry, if there's a Republican in, then Democrats are watching, Rachel Maddow or somebody horrible like that. But I think that MSNBC is worse because there's this veneer of respectability, this veneer of it's the well-educated people. It's our kind of people. It's not those evil Republicans. It's not the MAGA hat wearing Trumpers. So, and that's so when they have a former CIA or NSA director on, they look like the good guys, but they censor everyone. They're so many stories that are just not covered by the corporate media, and they're not covered by MSNBC either. They support overthrowing governments. They support all of these things that people who are anti-war activists are opposed to. And they tell us lies about foreign countries. They tell us lies about China. They tell us lies about Russia in order to get our support for all kinds of terrible things. So if you're told that there are, Uyghur concentration camps in China, well, the Chinese government can't be good, and you can end up joining in attacks on a country who have, first of all, not done what they've been accused of doing, and their only crime is competing with the United States where the United States doesn't want us. And with Russia, I don't even know where to begin. Russiagate is a complete fraud. There is no proof of any hacking on the part of WikiLeaks. There's no proof of any of the things that we have been told. Hillary Clinton lost because she wasn't paid. Actually, I want to point out last week, one of her lawyers, a guy at the law firm Perkins Coie, which is the Democratic Party law firm, was indicted because he lied to the FBI. Do you remember there was a story about an Alpha Bank, a bank in Russia, and there was some computer connection between the Trump Tower and Alpha Bank? That story was completely made up by the Democratic Party. So that is just an example of the things we've been told about Russia that are untrue. And it's not about countries being good or bad. It's about what they do. What do they do in the world? So I'm not going to say other governments are good, but they generally haven't done the things that we are told that they do. So I think it's important for us to look outside the bounds of corporate media, read Black Agenda Report, of course, and other people who cover these stories that are just ignored. And when you do, it's terrible to me that people want to be well informed. So they read the newspaper or they watch the news and you still don't know anything. You still don't know that, for example, these calls to boycott Chinese cotton because it's supposed to be picked by, Uyghur slave laborers. That's all a lie. It's mostly mechanized harvesting, and the Uyghurs who work in that industry are workers. They work, they get paid. And these boycotts, all they've done is put people out of work who people here think they're saving. And why do people think that? Because these people like MSNBC tell you that over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. So in these last 10 minutes or so, let's open up the floor for people if they have questions. They can use their raise hand feature on Zoom, or they can put their question in the chat and I'll read it off. I just want to say that these articles I referenced that Margaret wrote, in the coming days, tomorrow or the following day, I'll send a video recording of this event to everyone, and I'll also share those articles so people can read them and whatnot. So I see we have a question from Michael. Michael, can you unmute?
Yes, did I unmute? So the challenge I have, I've been hearing these community-based issues for years, and I know the corporate media never has really covered it, but it seems like sometimes we're out of context. After World War II, we were a new type of colonial empire, creating that and expanding it, taking over the French and British areas. And we did it in a neo-colonial way. We did it through debt. And so we had to use murder and we had to use other ways of torture to grow our empire. I mean, that's what empires do. And so we seem to have this assumption that we're not really an empire. We just kind of look like an empire, but we're not a real empire, right? Because we don't have colonies. And so it seems like it throws the whole conversation out of whack. I mean, if you look at the 60s, there was a fear by the FBI that a lot of Black people, like the Black Panthers, were being directed from the Soviet Union. It was never in any way verified, but that's what J. Edgar Hoover said. And then the CIA got involved with Project Chaos. So where I'm going with this is even progressives are woefully ignorant about some of the aspects of what we've done as our empire. And I agree that China is not a problem, but apparently Xi Jinping said that they're going to, get back to their communistic roots. And then the Western world went nuts. They said, well, you do that and we're going to take you down. They said, if we can't have you on your knees kissing our butt, you're no use to us. And so, I mean, I don't mean to put it that way, but the point is, we have a dedicated group of plutocrats, oligarchs, whatever you want to call them, who want to maintain their control of as much as they can. And every time they lose control of a country like China in 49, Cuba in 59, the whole Vietnam thing in 69, Iran in 79, they go nuts. And so this is the thing that's kind of hard to face up. It was hard for me to face up to.
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have a question? We want to get to as many questions as we can.
I'd just like to get Margaret's outlook on this.
Well, yes, the US does have an empire, and people don't think of it as one because we're so indoctrinated with the doctrine of American exceptionalism. America's exceptional. Obama used to say that all the time. It made me crazy. So we are indoctrinated about our country, about what it does around the world. So that's my shorthand response to the comment.
Thanks. Norma.
Hi, thank you. This is great. Would you have, maybe before I was able to join, you talked about this already, critical race thinking or critical, right? You might like to latch into that. The idea of not being able to mention that the US behavior murdered all the some nations of people, and the consistent horrification of Black communities, Black individuals, and bringing the rest of people into that with the propaganda that we were supposed to behave that way. And now the opposition to CRT as though it's racist.
Well, it's interesting to me. It's you can always tell what polls well in a Republican focus group, because they're always whipping people up into a frenzy about the Sharia law or Communist Party of China. Now it's critical race theory, although that's off the pages lately. But it's interesting to me. Critical race theory is a theory that it only existed mostly excuse me, amongst academics. And there are issues with it among Black people. We had a very good series 3-part article by Professor Patrick Anderson, so you should look those up. But it's nothing. It's a way to make people angry when their needs aren't met. So, for example, we don't have Medicare for all. Neither party wants to give that to people. So what do you do when you don't meet their needs? What do? Well, you divert their attention. And in this particular case, you use racism, anti-Black racism in particular, to control people. And so it's actually very sad to me that people are so uninformed, that they're so indoctrinated, and that they can turn on a dime. Nobody heard of critical race theory. I mean, how many people really had ever even heard of critical race theory until this year? And now people will, go to a town hall meeting in a rage over something they didn't know existed, that's not being taught in schools. It's just an example of the way we are kept under control and kept from being angry about the things we should be angry about.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Norma and Margaret, for that. I actually wanted to talk more about race tonight, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time. So maybe some other time. For the last question of the evening, could you, your friend and colleague Glenn Ford passed away, and he was a big towering figure in our communities. Could you talk to us a little bit about him? Maybe share some personal anecdote or anything you want with us about in regards to Glenn Ford?
Yeah, he was my mentor. I started working with Glenn when he was we were at Black Commentator in 2006. We started Black Agenda Report, and as we say, news and analysis from a Black left perspective, and we mean left, not Democratic Party. Glenn was a committed socialist. He had an interesting life story. He grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, between Jersey City, New Jersey and Columbus, Georgia. So when in the 50s, he grew up in the days of Jim Crow segregation, which is something that really honed him politically. He always put the condition of Black people in the forefront. But he was a Vietnam era veteran. He was a Black Panther as a young man and always in media. From his father was a DJ in Georgia, and he was on radio and broadcasting as a kid. So all of those things came together to create this, this amazing person who was dedicated to communicating with people, dedicated to lifting up, to amplifying left voices. And he could, and I strive to be like him. He was so knowledgeable about domestic issue, about foreign policy, about all kinds of things. And so he'll be missed. He passed away on July 28th, but Black Agenda Report continues with myself and others. We have a good group of editorial group, and we are marching onward, and the new issue comes out every Wednesday. That's tomorrow. That's why I have a hard stop tonight, because it's Tuesday. And we do really good work. I'm very proud to have been associated with Glenn and with Black Agenda Report. We had a beautiful memorial service last weekend at Riverside Church, and you can watch it on YouTube. You can see it on the Black Agenda Report Facebook page. Myself and others, people like Cornel West, Chris Hedges, and yours truly talking about Glenn and his impact.
Great, thanks for that. So the last question, very last question. If somebody had the chance to ask Glenn Ford what were his favorite books, do you know what he would have said?
Marxist Capital, I think, among others. I think so. He was a true socialist, and that was a big part of his thinking. I don't know. There were so many books that, I mean, if you look at Black Agenda Report, you can see the authors whose work he admired. So it's hard to say. He was such a well-read person. I say that somewhat humorously, but I think that was it. He was a socialist, very much so. But speaking of books, before we go, I'd like to briefly. You mentioned that I'm an author of a book, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. Here it is. I just put it up to my face so people know what it looks like. Published last year, and you can get it directly from the publisher, Steerforth Press. That's steerforth.com, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can order it from your local bookstore, and there's an audio version narrated by yours truly. So I hope you will all read my book as well.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm really excited to read it. I'm going to go buy it and read it. So everyone, I hope that everyone gets a chance to read it. Again, I will send everyone who registered for this event a recording of this video so they could reference that. I'll send links to Black Agenda Report. I'll send links for Margaret Kimberly, how you could support her on Patreon or other platforms. So please keep your eye out for that follow-up email. There'll be a lot of great resources in that. Margaret, before we close off for the night, are there any final closing words you want to leave us with?
Glenn always ended, whenever he spoke, he always ended his talk with the words, power to the people. And he really meant that, power to the people here, power to the people all over the world. He was a committed anti-imperialist. He was committed to social justice. And I think that is the audience that I'm speaking to tonight. So I hope we all feel powerful, and I hope we all see the power that we have, and we see the importance of taking action for the kind of world that we should have, the kind of lives we should have in this country, and the kind of world we want to see.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret, for joining us tonight. And thank you, everyone, for also spending your time with us tonight. So on that note, everyone, please have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Amar.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.